Riley's has always had it easy. She is from a wealthy family with loving and attentive parents who always provide for her. Upon graduating high school, where she is second best in her class, having a clear roadmap of her future, she set her sights on pursuing a career in law, following in her parents' footsteps at Georgetown University. She has everything a girl could desire: beauty, intelligence, supportive parents, and a devoted boyfriend named Chris. On the surface, Riley and Chris might not seem like a perfect match. While Riley is a straight-A student and a talented artist, creating her own graphic novels, Chris barely graduated high school and spends most of his time working on his motorcycle. However, their differences seem to complement each other. Even though her parents disapprove of her relationship with Chris, she refuses to give up on their love. She loves him endlessly and envisions a future together. Chris is the only one who truly understands her. She can confide her fears in him without fear of being judged. Her life is set to change forever. Riley receives a letter from Georgetown University about her admission application, and she knows her parents are waiting downstairs to hear if she got accepted or not. She's contemplating whether to open the letter or not, since its contents, whether good or bad, could change a lot. She takes a deep breath and opens it, with her fingers shaking. She quickly scans through the letter until the word "congratulations" catches her attention. Then it hits her: she has been accepted into this prestigious university to study her dream course in law. Her parents are sitting downstairs at the dining table, eagerly waiting to find out if she's been accepted. They wait for a while, and even though they're positive that she'll get in because of her excellent grades and recommendations, they need to be sure. They look up as they see her descending the staircase, wearing a frown. For a passing moment, they both think she's been rejected until she gets closer and announces that she's resuming school next semester with a big smile on her face. They're all super excited as they hug each other, grinning from ear to ear. Riley's mom suggests they order some takeout to celebrate, but she declines, saying she's going to a friend's party with Chris. They ask her to be careful while on his motorcycle. Riley walks out to Chris outside her house, waiting for her. When he sees her, her smile seems weird to him, so he asks her if she's fine. She responds with a nod. They arrive at the party, and everywhere is bursting with loud music, and people are dancing on the dance floor. Riley walks over to where her friends are standing and whispers something into the celebrant's ear. The celebrant seems excited by what she hears and embraces Riley enthusiastically. Suddenly, the celebrant pulls Riley to the front of the gathering and speaks into the microphone. She requests the music be stopped for a moment and then announces Riley's acceptance into the university. The entire crowd erupts in cheers and they congratulate her. Chris, her boyfriend, stands at the end of the hall with a sad expression on his face. He realizes that he wasn't the first to hear about Riley's admission, and it dawns on him that she may be leaving soon. His sadness turns into anger and he storms out of the room. Riley notices Chris is leaving and goes after him. Riley can see him pacing back and forth and knows he's angry. She goes closer to him and tries to reason with him, assuring him they can have a long-distance relationship. He gulps a bottle of beer, and she is aware how unhinged he gets when he's drunk. He expresses his desire to be close with her. She replies that being in a relationship with him shouldn't hinder her from pursuing her ambitions. She firmly tells him that her mind is already made up and cannot be persuaded otherwise. He tells her she's creative and could focus on her creative works here in California. She's surprised by this and tells him she only sketches for fun. He informs her he needs another drink and goes inside to get more. He's taking shot after shot when Riley walks up to their mutual friend Nate and asks to borrow his car. He gives her the key as she drags the visibly drunk Chris outside into the car. While they are in the car, Chris tells her that he loves her deeply and knows that her desire to attend Georgetown University is influenced by her parents. As Riley turns to glance at him, a fast-moving truck slams into their car, causing it to swerve. The last thing she remembers is asking Chris if he is okay before another speeding vehicle from the opposite road collides with the passenger side, and everything becomes a blur. Riley feels the sun's rays on her eyelids. She struggles to open her eyes, feeling heavy and bruised. She finally manages to open her eyes to find herself in a strange room, with her mom and dad by her side. As they notice her eyes open, they rush towards her with smiles. Riley asks what happened, and they explain that she was in an accident with Chris and suffered a concussion from the inflated airbag. However, the MRI revealed that she had no major injuries. Chris sits at the hospital since the accident, waiting for Riley to regain consciousness. He feels strange for some reason. Although Riley's parents haven't reacted or acknowledged his presence, all he cares about now is his girlfriend's recovery. As soon as she wakes up, he rushes to her bedside and he asks if she's okay. She doesn't respond or look in his direction. She asks after Chris, and he stands by her bedside looking confused by the question. He begins to call her name, saying he's here. She doesn't seem to hear him. He looks at her and then to her parents, who tell her that the doctors tried all they could, but he did not make it. He feels confused. What are they saying? Why are they lying to her? He's here with her. He tries to hold her hand, but he can feel a force repelling him. Riley begins to cry and her parents console her, but she screams to be left alone. Suddenly, pieces of the event flash through Shem's memory and he can see the car ramming into their vehicle. Then he sees himself at the mortuary. It's strange to him how he can be in different places within seconds. The room is dark, but he can see his mom standing over a body, weeping. She looks disoriented and so sad. He moves closer and realizes the body his mom is staring at is his own. Chris's mom walks out of the room. He begins to call her, but she doesn't respond. His mom collapses, and hospital staff surround her, trying to resuscitate her. He can't take this confusion anymore and runs out of the hospital into the street. Everything looks and feels strange. When one passes away tragically, sometimes their soul is held in purgatory, and they cannot move to the land beyond. He's confused by the sound of moving vehicles, voices, and street lights. No one pays any attention to him. As Chris stands in the street, a man with a full beard runs towards him, and to Chris's surprise, vehicles pass through the man as if he's not really there. The man asks Chris if he knows the address of a certain street, explaining that he's running late for work. A young black boy appears with a smile and gives the man the address he needs and asks him to run along. The boy reveals to Chris that the man is actually dead and unaware of his own passing. The boy introduces himself as Jordan and reveals that he has been dead for 30 years. He explains that in this realm, people appear as the age they were when they died in the physical world. Jordan asks Chris how he died, and Chris reveals it was a car crash. As they both stand on the rooftop, Jordan tells Chris that he knows he left someone in the physical world who loves and cares for him deeply. Chris's eyes fill with sadness, and Jordan advises him that as soon as he stops caring about that person, he will begin to feel better. Riley is at home after being discharged from the hospital. She is healing physically, but emotionally she is still wounded and traumatized. She goes through the videos and pictures of all the happy moments captured with Chris, wishing she could experience them again. Riley cannot stop blaming herself for Chris's demise, and many what-ifs go through her mind. She hears a knock on the door, and a man enters her room. He introduces himself as Jerkins as the homicide investigator and tells her not to worry, as this is routine protocol whenever someone dies. He pulls out chairs and sits by her bedside. He begins to ask a series of questions about the accident. They confirm her date of birth with her and proceed to inform her that the passenger side where Chris sat in, the airbag was non-functional at the time of the collision. She isn't aware as the car isn't hers. She is asked if she has been drinking or distracted, anything that might impair her judgment on the road. She responds to the negative. After the investigator leaves, her friends, Nate and Jules, come around to be with her and cheer her up. They talk about the fun memories they have with Chris, but this only deepens Riley's hurt. She opens up to her friend about how scared she is to lose her memories, the only thing she has of him left. Chris sees himself in Riley's room whenever he misses her. He knows he's dead, and the feeling of helplessness overwhelms him. He sees Riley hugging his jersey and crying her eyes out. He goes to where she sits and tells her he wishes she could hear him. He assures her she will be all right. Riley's parents are feeling dissatisfied with the direction of the investigation, and are apprehensive that it could potentially become a homicide case. They feel they are subtly trying to blame their daughter for the death of this. They are committed to supporting their daughter as she tries to cope with the aftermath of the traumatic events that have unfolded since her discharge from the hospital. They witness the depth of her pain and see how often she cries over Chris's death. The investigator assigned to the case, Jerkin, is failing to impress them. Today, he returns Riley's phone and discloses that the phone records show that she was on an active call during the time of the accident. This disclosure leaves her parents utterly stunned. Riley decides to go check on Chris' mom Lee. As she enters the house, she sees Lee moving stacks of paper. Lee complains about the funeral costs and Chris' dad refusing to pick up her calls. Riley offers to pay some of the funeral costs, but Chris' mom rejects the offer and asks her to leave and never come back to her house. A few weeks after the accident, they bury Chris. His friends, mom, and Riley family attend the burial. Chris finds himself at the cemetery and sees how sad everyone is. He notices his dad is not in attendance, which breaks his heart. His friend from this realm Jordan appears by his side and decides to teach him how to teleport to make him feel better. Chris feels strongly about the basketball game played at that time and teleports there. Then he thinks of his dad and appears at his dad's garage. He sees his dad working in the garage while his funeral is ongoing. Chris feels sad that even in his death, his father doesn't seem to care. Riley deals with the grief of losing Chris by going to their favorite hangout spot by the bridge and sketching. She enjoys the solitude and quiet. But while sketching and talking to Chris in this instance, she feels his presence surrounding her. She can almost touch and smell him. Then she hears his voice encouraging her. At first, she is scared and apprehensive. How can she hear his voice? Is she beginning to hallucinate? But somehow, hearing his calm voice comforts her. Chris is telling Jordan about his girlfriend Riley's ability to hear him speak. But Jordan is skeptical, stating that communication between the living and the dead is impossible. To confirm his experience, Chris insists on teleporting to the apartment of his sleeping friend Nate. Once there, Jordan asks Chris to try and communicate with Nate to prove that he can speak to the living. Despite several attempts, Nate does not respond to Chris. Jordan suggests that perhaps Chris has a unique connection with Riley that enables her to hear him, explaining why he cannot communicate with others who have passed on. Riley's parents are presented with the official copy of her phone record report, which states she was actively using her phone at the time of the accident. Her dad explains to her that if this is accepted to be true, then Chris' death would move from an accident to a homicide, and that may lead to a felony indictment on her. Riley says she doesn't care as she feels guilty enough. Her parents try to persuade her to not acknowledge the report to be true, but she still insists she's guilty and goes up to her room. Riley is in her room researching ways to communicate with the dead and reads about other people's experiences. She decides to follow some of the tips to try and feel Chris's presence again. Sneaking into their old high school, she heads to his locker room and sketches his face on the glass door. As she does so, she feels his touch, senses his presence, and even hears his whispers. Though she worries it might all be in her head, Chris insists he's really there and encourages her to find his dad's wristwatch, which he buried behind his house, as proof he is with her. Riley is convinced she isn't hallucinating, but she needs a conviction. As she picks up a shovel and heads towards Chris' home to look for the wristwatch he buried in their backyard. He had asked her to do this to prove she isn't insane. As she finds the wristwatch, everything begins to make sense, and she believes that her dead boyfriend is trying to reach her from the world beyond. However, Chris' mom sees her and reports her for trespassing after previously being asked not to visit again. Riley tries to explain to Chris' mother that she wasn't trespassing, but rather looking for a wristwatch that Chris had asked her to search for. However, this only makes her angrier. She accuses Riley of trying to steal from her and suggests that killing Chris wasn't enough. Riley's parents tell Lee, Chris' mother, that they understand she's hurting and going through a difficult time, but it's not right for her to come to their house and accuse their daughter of murder. That is a weighty allegation. Riley offers the watch to Chris' mother, but she declines, saying that every time she sees Riley, it reminds her of the loss of her only child. This scene shows Jordan and Chris are on the rooftop. Jordan asks Chris how he is able to communicate with Riley since he has been in this realm for 30 years, but has not been able to talk to anyone from the other side. Chris asks Jordan why he cares to communicate with anyone, as he has stated several times that he cares less about the living. Jordan admits that he still wants to be able to communicate with them. Chris tells Jordan that Riley's drawings connect them together. They both teleport to Jordan's Aunt Alicia's house and can see her playing the piano. Jordan looks at her with sadness and remembers how she used to play it for him every night before bedtime. He hates feeling this way. Chris isn't having fun being stuck in limbo. It bothers him that his father could be a perfect husband and father to his new family but didn't care about him when he was alive, or his mother. Whenever he feels strongly about this, he instantly teleports to his dad's apartment. Nate, Riley and Chris' mutual friend, whose car was used on the night of the accident, have been battling with guilt since Chris's death. Nate blames himself for not fixing his car, feeling that if he had fixed the airbag on the passenger's side, Chris might have survived, just like Riley did. He knows Inspector Jerkin is on the case, trying to prove that Chris's death was caused by negligence on his and Riley's part. Nate tries to drink away his guilt. It only intensifies. He tells his girlfriend Jules, who is also a mutual friend to Riley, that he is going to give himself up to the police. Jules immediately calls Riley to inform her of this. They both quickly go over to see Nate and possibly talk him out of his plan. Nate is overwhelmed with sorrow, but Riley assures him that Chris wouldn't want him to suffer. Nate questions how she knows what Chris would want, but Riley insists that she does. She leads them to a spot under the bridge and lights a bonfire, then starts sketching Chris's face in an attempt to summon him. Nate and Jules are puzzled as they watch Riley seemingly talking to no one. Riley finishes sketching Chris's face on the ground using charcoal and immediately senses his presence. She looks up and sees him standing in front of her smiling. Nate asks her what will happen next and she turns to him, telling him that Chris is here. They don't believe her because they can't see or feel him. She is just standing there with a creepy smile on her face. They think that Riley is losing her mind and urge her to accept that Chris is gone. But Riley refuses to give up and pleads with Chris to prove himself to their friends by revealing something about them that nobody else knows. However, Chris remains silent, leaving Riley feeling disappointed and frustrated. Chris and Jordan teleport to his Aunt Alicia's house and see her lying in state, with a room full of people paying their last respects. Then everything begins to connect. He explains to Chris that connecting to living people gradually zaps life from them until they die. The few connections he made with his aunts killed her because she had a few years left. He tells Chris that if he continues to see Riley, it's just a matter of time before she dies too. This is the first time he narrates the event that brought him here. He narrates the truth, how he came to be here. He tells Chris he was supposed to watch his niece during a carnival show, with his niece and aunt attending. But he got carried away and his niece ran into a moving vehicle. He was so distraught over her passing that he put a rope to his neck. Chris knows what to do next. In this scene, Riley sketches to summon Chris while Chris appears, but this time he isn't happy. He tells her he can't afford to see her again because he needs to stay away, for her own good. However, she cuts him short. She reveals to him that every time he visits her, it changes her. She feels different. Riley asks if there's a possibility of bringing him back. Chris asks her to stop, seeing him as making her sicker and sicker. She retorts that it isn't for him to decide. She cannot lose him. He nods his head, telling her he's killing her. He says even if he leaves, she still has the memories of them together. He gives her a quick embrace and vanishes. Since Chris's demise, Riley is unable to accept his death. She has lost all purpose in life and merely exists day to day, hoping to see him and talk to him. Her friends do not believe her when she tells them that Chris visits her. They believe she's struggling with immense grief and trauma from the accident. Riley cannot confide in her parents either, as she fears they may overreact. Riley is gradually losing her mind, spending all day sketching and hoping Chris will appear. The longer he refuses to show up, the more she spirals into insanity. She cares for nothing in the world but to see him. Meanwhile, Chris knows he cannot visit her as he can see that she's on the brink of insanity, losing the light in her eyes and enthusiasm for life. It pains him to stay away from her while he exists in limbo. Detective Jerkins visits Riley's family and informs them that Nate, the owner of the car they drove the day of the accident, received a ticket in Texas a week earlier for a faulty brake light. So far, he's been unable to prove that he fixed the brake light. The detective informs them that if Nate cannot provide evidence of fixing the brake light, he will close the investigation on Riley. Her parents breathe a sigh of relief upon hearing this. Chris appears at his father's garage, where he sees him fixing his bike. Chris tells his father he will never forgive him for his absence during his childhood. He admits to wasting so much time thinking about him and hopes that he sticks to his new family, and does not become a deadbeat father to his young son this time. Though his father cannot hear him, Chris' father feels intense guilt for not being there for him. The next day, Chris' father buys a flower and visits his son's graveside. This scene shows Jules at the workshop putting together pieces of fabric on a mannequin to design an attire. Suddenly, she sees Riley walking and looking disheveled. Jules asks her what the matter is. Riley replies that Chris has stopped coming to her for days now. Jules tells her that it's a good thing, but Riley doesn't seem to agree. Jules turns to leave. She hears Riley thank her for being a good friend. Immediately, Jules picks up her phone and calls Riley's parents to inform them of what has just happened. Riley's parents notice that she has left the house, so they begin to look for her by tracking her phone. Riley is consumed with thoughts of being reunited with Chris. Nothing matters if Chris isn't with her. She sees herself running into the wide body of water. As she gradually submerges, her only thought is to see the love of her life again. She can see Chris pulling her out of the river, carrying her to the land. He tells her to try not to hurt herself, that everything will be fine soon. He tells her to stay alive for him and encourages her to breathe in. As she inhales, she begins to throw up all the water she ingested. She realizes she was rescued from drowning by lifeguards. Paramedics stabilize her and drive her to the hospital. A few months after her discharge, Riley feels back to her former self. She's thriving and is looking forward to resuming school at Georgetown University, where she intends to study fine arts, not law, like her parents wanted. She is following her dreams and utilizing her creativity. She writes and publishes the love story of herself and Chris, including all the original sketches she makes while he is still alive, which she dedicates to him. She knows she will make him proud. Chris wholeheartedly decides to sever his connection with Riley and is released from purgatory to the great beyond. His soul is no longer trapped in limbo, wandering aimlessly. He is free. Wherever he is happy knowing that Riley is enjoying life.